we're back on the road this April with our live show, Cocaine Cowboys. If you want to hear the story of Ireland's love affair with Colombian powder and those who made millions in the gold rush, limited availability remains in Belfast at ulsterhall.co.uk. That's ulsterhall.co.uk. Baba Arum has finally changed his tune, and actually totally changed his tune about Daniel Kinahan, where once he was supporting him completely when he was sort of fixing bouts for Tyson Fury. And from memory, one of them in the States in Vegas. Is that right?
Well,
he was involved in that one.
He was involved in a number of fights with Daniel Kinahan. I think it was up to 4 for various boxers, including the Tyson Fury fight. Bob Arum, of course, is a legendary promoter. I think he's 92 years old now at this stage. He was a former. He was a
barrister, wasn't he?
He was a district attorney, I think, even at one stage. But he probably made his name as a promoter. Muhammad Ali is where he's best known. But as MTK rose to the top of MTK Global rose to the top, Bob Arum started dealing with Daniel Kinahan. At that stage, Daniel Kinahan was, already very much a notorious figure. The Hutch Kinahan feud was ongoing. He was named in all sorts of places. And Bob Arum, he never refuses the mic when it's put in front of him.
No, he's a great man for a quote. And before we go any further, I just want to say that what we're going to talk about is an interview he did with John Hand, who's the news and crime correspondent of the Irish Sun. John's a very good reporter, and he has got these excellent quotes from him, which really just sort of bring us back into the world of boxing and the Kinahans.
Yeah, and he's spoken to Bob Arum over the years, and Bob Arum has given him, I'd say, a different take as the winds blew in different directions. Because Bob Arum, at a certain point, he was quoted as saying, Daniel Kinahan, I can't remember the exact phrase, but he was a gentleman, a man of honour, a man of his word. He's only had positive dealings with him. He's been a great partner in this business of arranging fights.
I think he also said he'd no convictions, which was obviously the narrative that was always coming from Daniel Kinahan. And he kind of suggested... this was pre-sanctions, because I think this is probably the first time we've heard from Bob Arum since the sanctions. But pre-sanctions on the Kinahan mob, he said that everyone kind of deserved a second chance. He hinted that he knew there was something in the background with Kinahan, but that, as far as he was concerned, there was all sorts basically tied up in boxing, and that, once he wasn't sort of doing anything now, that he didn't care about his past.
No, and that he made a particular point of saying that he was an honourable man, that if he said he was going to do something, Daniel Kinahan would do it. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't have to be the world's greatest cynic to say that part of Bob Arum's motivation were the fact that Daniel Kinahan was able to arrange these massive fights, had such an influence, and these fights were coming at a difficult time for boxing, I suppose, as well, where some of the money that had been traditionally in the US and in other markets kind of was drying up. The boxing world was really focused on the Middle East and finding a presence there, which that continues to be the case. We can see Saudi Arabia, you might argue, has become the most important venue for boxing now. And Daniel Kinahan obviously had his contacts there, and the MTK Global had hoovered up some of the biggest boxers in the world. So,
but Arum, he is rent-a-quote, shall we say?
Yeah.
And he's also quite controversial, but he is also the CEO of Top Rank Promotions. And his kind of backing to Kinahan gave him kudos within the world, and it allowed people sort of ignore the elephant in the room at the time. He was a big name to be coming in behind Daniel Kinahan.
Big time. I mean, he and of course they famously posed together at a gala, was it? I can't remember.
Dinner in Kazakhstan, I think.
Kazakhstan, yeah. During which we ultimately had the video. You wrote it up yourself of Daniel Kinahan playing. I think it was $125,000 for a football that had been used in the Champions League final that was given to charity. But Bob Arum had posed with Daniel. I think Daniel's in a tux anyway, isn't he?
Yeah, I think they were seated at the same table.
So this is at the time when, certainly was a move to sort of cleanse his reputation. And Bob Arum, who's more famous than almost anybody in the boxing world, that gave him a kind of a credibility. It lended credibility to Daniel Kinahan as a legitimate businessman.
It propelled him right into the top of the fight game, really, I think, the relationship with Arum, because that was at a point, so a lot of boxers were coming out. Bit by bit, they were coming out saying Daniel Kinahan's a really good guy, and you could see he had, obviously, Tyson Fury had done that famous selfie, which was what propelled him back into the public eye, because he had been in the background for a long time, in Dubai in particular, since he moved there, and the gym, MGM, was sold to Sandra Vaughan, and she soon after, Kinahan moved at lock, stock and barrel out to Dubai as well. So he had been silent, and then there had been Tyson, and then a string of boxers came out and said he was a great guy. But Arum was like this international superstar.
Yeah, of
and
course.
It was like almost as if his word was final. And there was nothing else to say then about it.
No, and of course, it was all quite mysterious. I mean, who was paying who? And it's still kind of confusing, is it, at times? Because Daniel Kinahan, obviously, his links to MTK, they're there, obviously. But he wasn't, at that point, he was at least claiming to have no involvement in the ownership of the company.
Exactly, that he wasn't being paid or wasn't working or have anything to do with MTK. So it was a kind of a word game with them. He was saying that he wasn't a promoter working for MTK.
Yeah.
He was an advisor that was kind of this...
Working for the boxers who happened to be contracted to MTK.
And he was this kind of fixer between MTK and top.
Yeah, so he would manage the boxer. He would be an independent person managing the boxer.
Not managing either, because that word couldn't use that word because he wasn't licensed or something.
Yeah.
It was an advisor, I think, was the word they settled on.
Okay, and then he would interact with MTK Global and Top Rank on behalf of the boxer, I suppose. And the fact that he used to own MTK was nothing to do with anything. It was almost coincidental, I think, was the line that was taken. So it was never clear whether he was making money out of all of these arrangements, really. At that point, certainly he didn't seem to be massively motivated by getting a payday out of some of these fights anyway. For the obvious reason that it wasn't his main source of income. I suppose the drugs business was where he was making money hand over fist. But it is interesting to hear now Bob Arum speaking about, I think is it...
Because of course Arum and Fury, like immediately after those sanctions came in, they just drew back completely.
Yeah.
And maybe he did issue a few quotes around the time.
He did a couple of interviews with sort of boxing magazines, and he did say then that Daniel, he had got wind of something, I suppose,
and he wasn't going to kind of go
up against the US
Treasury.
Government. If the US
now what he said to John Hand is that Daniel Kinahan is a super con man and a dirty fucker.
Yeah. Which is a kind of a direct opposite to a gentleman of his word. But
now wait till I find the other quotes, because this is really quite interesting. So he says that, we know that he has already admitted that he paid Kinahan up to $8 million over 4 Fury bouts. I think.
Well, it wasn't just Fury fight. There was other fights as well that were connected with MTK fighters. So some of them were other championship fights, not to do with Tyson Fury. Okay,
I think he has just admitted to the $8 million for Fury alone for 4 of Fury's bouts, right? About $2 million per fight. So he says about Daniel Kinahan, he was charming. So he is a super con man. He convinced me and my people that yes, he had a bad background, but he'd gone straight. And he was doing this involvement in boxing because he wanted his kids to be proud. That was his story. And when we were around them, he was nothing but charming until he started doing bad things. A dirty fucker. He showed his cards even before the Biden sanctions announcement. And so you have at least 6 months before we realised that what we were dealing with. And we cut him off and stopped dealing with him.
But it is interesting, and he has sort of suggested something similar to that it wasn't, like obviously when the sanctions came, that relationship, he instantly brought that to an end. But it is interesting that again, he's being probably a bit clearer on this occasion that something, had occurred in before the sanctions even came to light that made them realise. And I think he said before, Arum, that he started to realise that it wasn't all in the past. What that exactly is, I don't know. But yeah, it's. I suppose it's. You can have it's hard to have too much sympathy for Bob Arum in terms of getting involved with this guy, because although it's this, Daniel Kinahan has no convictions. He has no convictions to this day. I mean, the US Treasury saying he's involved in drugs crime isn't a conviction. But the idea that Bob Arum, a very clever man with a legal expertise, could just think that this is all a conspiracy, that people are making up Daniel Kinahan being a gangster is.
And of course, it would be a criminal offence for him to continue dealing financially with Daniel Kinahan, given that he is sanctioned.
Yeah.
Because that's the power of the sanctions in the US.
Yeah.
They kind of cut off the oxygen to anybody doing business in the US. Now, that's him. And he says that he's not suing Daniel Kinahan to get his money back or anything like that. But it's a relationship that he's eager to forget about, and life goes on. So he just wants to park that chapter in his life. He said that Kinahan advised dozens of fighters in professional boxing until April 2022 and was a key negotiator for bouts being held in Saudi Arabia. So that's Arum. Now, also in the States in recent weeks, Daniel Kinahan has been hit or is about to be hit with a bill in this Harida boxing civil case, which has been ongoing for ages. And it is all to do with Kinahan being accused of poaching a boxer from another stable, which of course is something that our own Barry McGuigan has suggested in the past, that 3 of his boxers that had been trained up by his son Shane were sort of lured by money into MTK, which Daniel Kinahan has claimed he'd nothing involved in. But nonetheless, I think Barry McGuigan, we can safely say, would feel that Daniel Kinahan was working in the background trying to lure his boxers with money, which he describes as sort of, dirty money, drug money.
Yeah.
Now, the boxers will absolutely refute that they have ever taken anything like that. I mean, everything they did was a business arrangement, and it was have earned legitimate money.
Yeah, and they were paid through legitimate companies.
Yeah.
But I think I suppose the Harida case that goes on in the US, like, it's very long running and quite technical in bits, but it's just part of, I suppose if you look back at the Bob Arum situation, people now, there was this aura of absolute fear around Daniel Kinahan. I mean, about people even saying a word against him. And you can see that has begun to break down, or has broken down, I would think would be fair to say. Bob Arum obviously feels comfortable saying that, feels that won't impact him in either a physical sense or in a professional sense in regards to boxers. This case is ongoing, and Daniel Kinahan is sort of powerless to affect that. And then again, the Sunday World reported through Pat O'Connell this week how 5 companies that have been associated with Daniel Kinahan in the Emirates have been struck off. So there is a general kind of tightening of the screw on him, really, isn't there?
Well, yeah, if you'd any sense. But I mean, what I know from contacts anyway, is that he is, he's certainly still agitating to be involved in boxing. Yeah. He didn't, a lot of people say, walk away after those sanctions. That, the suspicion is that he has kept very much his tentacles into boxing, and his money, whatever he was doing with the money, he was clearly using boxing as a way of laundering his money. He's still there. I mean, look, I think he is like a guy hanging on to the side of a boat. You know what I mean? He still has one hand clinging to the deck. Yeah. And he's not going to let any of that go easily. No. I would think that Daniel Kinahan over the past number of years, and perhaps we'll say back to 2016, hasn't been operating with any sense of realism or logic. Yeah. Okay, he managed to sort of bully his way into boxing with this narrative that he had done bad things in the past, he changed his ways and he wanted to make his kids proud. I mean, I think I can believe that.
Yeah.
That was the narrative that he convinced people of. And I find it interesting that Arum should suggest that he is at the heart a fraudster, because that's what I would always say about the father.
Yeah.
And they do seem to be able to convince people. And if you talk to people involved in Daniel Kinahan with the criminality, the sort of the organised crime, you find a lot of people, both still within his ranks and now outside the ranks, that know damn well that they were lied to.
Yeah.
And really, they talk about this very convincing liar.
Yeah.
A man who convinced people, if he perhaps directed a murder back in Spain, that he didn't do it, that it was somebody else. And he can convince people black as white.
Yeah. I mean, I think, isn't there the famous quote from the race fixing trial where somebody says about Daniel, when one of the jockeys, I think he says, when he speaks to you, you know you've been spoken to. Yeah. I think it is. And they're talking there. A sense of menace, but also a sense of presence. And certainly with the murders, that was very much a Kinahan tactic. If you look back to somebody like the murder of Hatcher Kavanagh in Spain, Gerard Hatcher Kavanagh, who was very much an associate and an important part of that operation, in terms of collecting money in particular, and he was executed. We've gone into that before, not to go into it, but we certainly were told in the aftermath, although Daniel Kinahan played a key role in that murder, that he went around and propagandised about how devastated he was, how he had nothing to do with it, visited family members, friends of Hatcher Kavanagh, put a huge amount of effort into being a visible mourner. And it was only over time that those people realised it wasn't straight away.
And wasn't it the same with Paddy Doyle in 2008 when he was shot dead? Kinahan sent home Gary Hutch to pay for the funeral, apparently. So the story goes. Now, maybe Paddy Doyle's parents would have a different version of those events, but that he sent home Gary Hutch to carry the funeral, or to carry the coffin, when in actual fact he had ordered the murder himself. So it is very much a tactic. And look, I suppose within the world of organised crime and drug dealing, you don't expect people to be very honest and moralistic, but it does seem to be almost part of his personality to be able to tell a story, and for people who would like to think themselves as wily and able to see the wood from the trees, as being just completely and utterly taken in by him.
Yeah, and I think you could say that is also true for some of the boxers probably who came across him. Certainly the boxing is like, I don't think we'll ever get to the bottom of what went on in the boxing world regarding Kinahan. I think we've a better chance of getting to the bottom of his involvement in the drugs business than we do in the boxing world. That may someday, the drugs business may become clear in court, where money was moving and what his role and what everybody's roles were. Like the boxing world seems to be even murkier. You don't think it's simpler? Well, I
mean, I think he came to the table with money, and that was what bought everybody and loyalties, and he was able to look as if he was this great saviour of the boxers, that he was offering them this glittering golden future that no one else was.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the heart of it for sure, but how they moved the money and how he got paid and how other people got paid, I think it's just so confusing.
I mean, how people higher up, the likes of Bob Arum, really got into bed with him and claimed, Google him at that point, and you would have found plenty.
I mean, we had, I even just before the sanctions came, it was very close to when they came out. We had, I think it was a Mexican man who was a head up in one of the boxing unions coming out and doing a whole speech about how Daniel had been wronged in terms of, I mean, his timing was really bad. I can't remember his name off the top of my head because the sanctions came out very shortly after. I mean, I think that was within weeks. So people like that, you can see, might have been naive and been fooled. But I mean, there was the part of the reason Daniel got so far was that a lot of the boxers enjoyed his notoriety. And let's be clear. I mean, if you look at some of the people in the UK, not to get specific about anybody, some of those people involved in that boxing world would have had plenty of family connections in the worlds of organised crime. They would have known, not just from the Irish media, but from other sources, just literally the word on the street, what Kinahan was all about. And I think that was an appeal for boxers rather than, not for all of them, obviously, but for some of them.
A long history of...
Yeah, and the people liked being around somebody of that type. The deals done, the movement of finances through the Gulf states, I think, it'll just never be
I agree
traced.
with you on that. I mean, that's because you're just not going to get the help you need from the authorities.
And never
in those
will.
Countries. Never will.
There's loads of companies, and again, we won't go into them, companies springing up connected to the world of boxing, springing up, closing down, renaming, having funny addresses, similar addresses to other addresses, and it just goes on and on and on. Even to keep track of it would be confusing, I think.
Trying to weed a garden, isn't it?
Yeah.
But in the meantime, in Dubai, Kinahan certainly is, when he is, for example, in a gym, maybe on his own, he cannot still help himself but to go over and interfere with somebody who's training and try to show them how to do it. He genuinely believes that he has this, his reason to be on earth was to become the most famous ever boxing, what would you call it, a coach, a guru?
Yeah, promoter, I suppose. Ultimately, he wanted to be one of those people.
And he was a bit of a boxer himself, but I don't think he was ever, people clapped when he was in the ring, but probably because they had to clap because it was Daniel Kinahan. But he genuinely believed himself. And I suppose, it's a little bit of a one of those situations that if you believe yourself to be something, you can become that. And of course, the Tyson Fury story is undoubtedly amazing, what he came back from.
Yeah.
Drug addiction, weight gain, phenomenal weight gain, and how he was brought back from the edge by and into Kinahan's fold in at the time MGM in Spain. He was trained up. He was brought back down to his correct weight. He was given a nutritionalist. He was given a place to live. He was out there with his pal. Do you remember the guy who used to text me? Billy Joe Saunders, at his side all the time. And what happened with Tyson from a sporting perspective and as a sports person was extraordinary.
Yeah.
And of course that gave Kinahan even more of an ego about himself with the boxing. Who did that? Was it a bit of both of them? Was it a bit of Tyson, a bit of Daniel?
Give Tyson the ultimate accolade for it, and of course he's facing another like a world record fight now in the next few weeks in Saudi Arabia, which will be one of the biggest fights in the history of the world.
And there's no indication that Tyson is really, Tyson, the sanctions happened. Tyson was refused to be allowed into, he didn't board the plane, he bought a ticket for the States and was told he wasn't going to be allowed go. His brother, his big brother, star brother, Tommy Fury, was refused entry into the States as well because of these sanctions and because of the long list of associates of the Kinahans that were banned from entry. But Tyson, I don't think there's any indication, never heard a sniff, never heard a rumour that he did anything but walk away from Kinahan.
Yeah, no, I think he definitely did.
He just walked away, didn't he?
Yeah, I think he walked away. I think that, obviously because of the scale of his achievements in boxing, there was other people to pick him up and
we're open to be corrected on that, by the way.
Yeah, but I think he did walk away, and I think, that was accepted. So
he was questioned by a Sky reporter about it, and he kind of got cross and refused to answer.
Yeah.
And that was it then. It was like as if it was parked, it was in his past. He never kind of came out and did a Bob Arum on it and said that he was an asshole, basically. He just said...
No, look,
nothing to say here.
Nothing to say here. Obviously Tyson Fury was born in Ireland, wasn't he? Or his family were certainly from Galway. So he has long...
Was he Galway?
Yeah, it was Galway, yeah. So look, there was members of those people would have known each other. But Tyson Fury seems to have walked away. He's a huge boxing star. But I suppose what we'll see now, what we are seeing is, and what we hear is that Daniel Kinahan tries to retain an interest in that boxing world. There obviously are a lot of boxers in the Middle East. There's people that publicly were describing Daniel as their best friend in the boxing world. They have gone very quiet, but there's every reason to believe that Daniel Kinahan keeps in touch with these people, keeps in touch with that world. And really what goes on in the Middle East is a mystery, really, isn't it? Like in that.
I mean, look, it is. And we know that, while efforts continue and the Irish government is very much part of those efforts to find a way for an extradition process from Dubai to Ireland in particular, that the DPP is considering what, if any, charges to bring against Daniel Kinahan. And we're moving very steadily towards, bringing him back here, possibly to stand in the dock of the Special Criminal Court. But in the meantime, he is really struggling to keep up his powerful connections that he has in Dubai within, he has...
Civil society, really, as well.
Well, and within the royal family, he has strong connections over there within the royal family, but he has still got a circle of friends around him, Irish friends around him, some of them boxers, some of them friends from the drugs world that have kind of been with him as he made his way from, I suppose, Oliver Bond to Spain initially and then on to the Gulf. Many of them sanctioned with him, but one of them, I think, in particular, that has always been one of his greatest loyalists is a guy called John O'Carroll, a Dublin boxer who moved to Spain initially and I think then has been settled full-time in Dubai and actually did a video. He was videoed at a pool talking basically, in glowing terms about Daniel Kinahan and what he'd done for him. And I think that was the one and only sort of video that came out in the aftermath of the sanctions. He was going to still support him. But Carroll has recently visited Mecca, where he has been pictured wearing a white robe, or what's it called, an Arum, and he's converted to Islam. And he was videoed at Mecca wearing, everything and talking about, quoting him here, "Look how powerful this is. I'm here with all my brothers. I'm experiencing this for the very first time. Inshallah, many more times. This is such a powerful place. The energy is electrifying. I'm sweating just walking around. Look at how powerful this is." Now, his conversion to Islam, perhaps. Let's keep an eye and see what happens with Daniel Kinahan next.
Yeah, I mean, John O'Carroll is an interesting life story, which he's spoken about himself over the years. He was grew up in the inner city in Dublin. No involvement in Daniel Kinahan's organised crime business, nothing like that. Nobody ever says that. John O'Carroll was a talented boxer, but maybe just wasn't able to make it as a professional, get the breaks, be able to survive full-time as a boxer, do all the training, go live as a boxer financially, had to get other jobs, kind of struggled to hit the big time in his mid-20s until he came across MTK Global and Daniel Kinahan. They then took him over to Spain, allowed him to train full-time. That pushed him forward and he made it as a boxer. And as a result of that, the fact that, because basically without that sort of the MTK Global machine that wasn't looking for an instant return on a boxer, he was able to make it because they were willing to do that. And as a result of that, he became one of the Kinahan cheerleaders, I suppose you could say. He spoke about how Daniel Kinahan had changed his life, the glowing terms, about how Daniel Kinahan had not just changed his life as a professional boxer, but changed his life as a person. He was incredibly loyal to Kinahan, constantly came out and spoke in these terms about him as being almost, an almost spiritual guru as well as a businessman. And then when the sanctions came in, he eventually, John O'Carroll ended up in Dubai as well. He actually had some great videos this week of the floods in Dubai, actually. No, John O'Carroll did. Yeah, really, really good videos. But he obviously ended up in Dubai with Kinahan, continued to be pictured with him every now and again. And as you said, when the sanctions were lifted and many of the others stopped talking, John O'Carroll kept going. But in recent times then, after maybe going a bit quieter, he converted to Islam and he's become a kind of a social media star because he's visited Mecca, as he said. He's speaking about it, getting huge feedback across the world from the Muslim community, praising him and congratulating him. visited Mecca, which is a thing that if you're a Muslim, that everybody is aims to do at one point in your life. The videos actually are really great, some of them, just the scenes. But certainly for John O'Carroll, he's not under investigation for any criminality. But it is true that people that convert to Islam, and this doesn't apply to John O'Carroll, but if you were in a Muslim country and you had gone through a public conversion, it would be a reason why you might not be extradited.
Yeah.
If you were to say that. And as I said, that's nothing to do with this boxer.
Nothing to do with John O'Carroll, but I mean,
very sincere.
It's when you look at the measures that the Kinahans are taking in order to agitate against any extradition.
Yeah.
We know that Christy Kinahan Sr. was attempting to move onwards again to Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
Before the sanctions, we know that Daniel Kinahan has really deeply embedded himself in whatever connections he's made in the Emirates in the hopes that his friendships and the loyalties of some of the royal that he's friendly with and everything will stand to him. We know that they are working within, as fixers between the Colombians and some Iranian and Russian and the regimes there, basically, to keep, I suppose, those doors open should they need them. It wouldn't be absolutely shocking if we next see Kinahan going down the same route as his pal John O'Carroll. But look, but that's none. John O'Carroll's videos are actually quite interesting, I have to say, in his conversion. But you do see, you must check them out. I think it's interesting to see those companies. These are just 5 companies that were registered to the Kinahans be struck off in the United Arab Emirates. It might not seem like an important thing, but that was the logic of why they had their work permits and their living permits there. I mean, they ran these companies. I think Hazium General Trading. They according to themselves, they were involved in the import and export of food stocks, really, and they were importing and exporting edible oil, pasta, poultry, all of that. There's no mystery what those companies were there for. But that was the basis on which they got these living permits and these residency arrangements. Now, we don't know if they set up further companies in the meantime or whatever, but the fact they're being struck off could be another little barrier to it could be another indication that should there be extradition proceedings agreed, that maybe this wouldn't stand in the way because they had residency. If those companies have been dissolved, they no longer hold that title. So okay, well look, I think that there is other news within that boxing world. Now maybe it's a bit complex, but I'll try and find somebody to come on and talk with us about some of the companies that have popped up, and those ones that you mentioned that
popped up and pop up and pop down and
pop down, and
pop out
maybe
again.
We'll get somebody on with a little bit of in-depth knowledge in the boxing world and see what the suspicions are as regards Kinahan and his ongoing efforts to cling on to that sport. So look, right, we'll talk.
We'll talk again.
I'm Nicola Talent and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.